Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Saucis. Since becoming popular in the West, yoga has been embraced mostly by women, even though for thousands of years, women were not allowed to teach yoga or to be involved in the philosophical aspects of the discipline. In recent years, more men are coming back to practice, but is yoga good for men? Is there a reason why they should not practice it? To answer these questions, I invited today Baxter Bell. Baxter, welcome.
Thanks, nice to be here.
Baxter has been actively deepening his understanding of yoga and relaxation since making the stress-reducing move from a career as a busy family doctor to that of a yoga teacher and medical acupuncturist. He is now involved in the integration of therapeutic applications of yoga with Western medicine, lecturing to healthcare professionals. He studied with Rodney Yee, Patricia Walden, and Erich Schiffman, and has been strongly influenced by the work of TKV Desikachar and Donald Moyer. Baxter is also on faculty for several teacher training programs and teaches workshops and retreats around the country and internationally, including specific Yoga for Men classes. Baxter, what was your first experience of yoga?
Well, it happened to be practicing to a video done by a man. So I actually did my first asana practice to a Rodney Yee video. I think it was Yoga for Power. And it was a very strong physical practice. At the time, I wasn't doing yoga. I was rock climbing, mountain biking, running, swimming, doing a lot of physical activities, but I had not done yoga. And so when I saw this practice on the screen that my girlfriend was doing, I was kind of intrigued. I was like, wow, who's this guy? He looks super strong, super powerful, really doing some beautiful, amazing stuff. And so I asked if I could jump in and try it. And I was hooked, really. And not only the physicality of the practice, but as you and I have talked about before, it was also that moment of quieting in the mind, that moment of introspection and reconnection to myself on some level.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, you entered into the yoga world as many, we can say, through the physical aspects first, or yes?
Yeah, it was the physical aspects.
Yeah. Why do you think, because I don't know, then you started going to some classes. In Popular, you were one of the, probably you were one of the only men in class.
Yeah, maybe one or two other guys, I think, in class.
Did that make you uncomfortable?
No. When I was in college, a friend of mine suggested that we take this modern dance class, this buddy of mine, and we were the only two men and there were 30 women in there. And I was like, what? I was just not uncomfortable with that. I was fine with that. So I wasn't anywhere near as flexible as my classmates were, but I was really intrigued with what we were studying. And so it was fine. I wasn't particularly uncomfortable. However, having been in the yoga world now for over 20 years, I know that's not always the case for the men that take class. That I have heard from them that sometimes they feel a little intimidated, self-conscious, incompetent, a whole number of adjectives are used. Distracted, sometimes, yeah, really distracted. So there's a lot of different experiences that men have that in a way become barriers to them really being able to drop in and enjoy the practice sometimes.
Yes, and why do you think that it happened that after thousands of years, all of a sudden it came to the West and then mostly women?
Isn't it interesting, the story of Indra Devi going and just kind of pestering Krishnamacharya till, his wife, I think, finally said, this woman is not going to go away.
Well, actually, it was Indra Devi's father, who was a close friend of the king, and he was the one that
he was
said,
the one kind of, yeah. She's not going to go away. She's going to keep at this, right? So it's interesting that, in modern times that some of these powerful women were the people that were really interested in learning about yoga. So I don't know exactly why that's happened that way. I don't know if women were receptive to some of the underlying messages of yoga, the philosophy of yoga or not. But for whatever reason, obviously in the West, we've got the vast majority of practitioners are women. I will say though, I teach a back care yoga class every week in Oakland. And that is 50-50 men and women. And I think the reason being is that men injure their backs a lot and they're looking for something to help them. And so that class has an equal number of men and women in it.
Yeah, and perhaps in that case, for some of the activities that men usually enjoy, back pain is limiting. It interferes with it.
Yeah, they can't do simple things like riding their bike or walking or playing basketball or whatever they like to do normally. So I find that the men are much more interested in trying out yoga because it holds the potential for healing for them. Yeah, but in the public classes, it can still be a little tricky. Because I'm a male teacher, a lot of women who are my students have been able to convince their partners by saying, you really ought to come take class with this guy. They kind of emphasize that it's a man teaching the class, so you can see that it's not just this thing for women. And it's been pretty effective. I mean, I actually, I have nowhere near 50-50 in my regular public classes, but in some of the classes, I taught a class last evening where I think there were 25 students in class and there were 7 men, which was pretty good, and so some evenings there's a lot of men in class, sometimes there aren't. In addition to that, a friend of ours, David Moreno, who's been on your show before, had this idea a couple years ago of having a men's only class in Berkeley that was held once a month. The men's Kula.
We both taught for this.
Yeah. And I co-taught last month, and I'm going to be leading the asana this week when it happens on this coming weekend. And that's been really intriguing to see the turnout and the real embracing of that style of class for the men that come for that. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah, it's a very interesting experience, I have to say as well. Yeah, and also David, who is very deeply rooted in the yoga tradition, also has brought a little bit back the ancient way in which yoga has been passed through from one generation to the other, which was mainly the fathers to the sons and the uncles to the nephews and the brothers to the younger brothers. And this idea he has of 4 teachers at the same time teaching rather than just one teaching the class, I particularly enjoy that.
Well, I think it's really nice because I think it immediately takes away the guru, the expert, that there's actually this sharing, this collaboration going on.
Right.
And that's quite beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
I also enjoy that idea a great deal as well.
Now, you are a practitioner, but you're also a doctor. Is yoga really good for men? Or?
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
No, I know, but...
No, it's great for men, and it's great for people. But in particular, I think it's really important for men. A lot of men will react to stress by withdrawing. There's the man cave, we joke about that. But, it's like I go into this room down in the basement in the dark, and I flip on the TV and I pour myself a stiff drink and I watch sports or men beating themselves up or, a violent movie, and that's supposed to be really good for lowering my stress levels. Yeah. And we actually know that actually isn't all that effective. I mean, it's an option of how one could respond. But, we know through such things as the Ornish heart study that he's done now, he's repeated 4 different times over the last 35 years, that actually the majority of people in those studies are men who have had heart attacks, right? And that actually a combination of group process, regular walking, an hour of gentle, not vigorous, but gentle yoga with breath work and meditation, and a change in dietary habits, those 4 pillars of his program have not only stopped the progression of heart disease, but have actually reversed the blockages in the blood vessels themselves. No medication can claim that response in Western medicine. So we know that this combination of lifestyle changes, of which yoga is one part, is in a way more powerful than modern pharmaceutical in addressing a very specific health problem that affects many, many men in this country every year.
Yeah.
Including a family member of mine who's younger than I am, who just had a cardiac event last year. So, it's like, this is really important for us to keep in mind. And, it's not that having a heart attack means you failed as a person. I mean, let's be realistic. Half the people in the United States, men and women, that are going to die this year are going to die from a heart attack. So it's one way that people die. And there are a lot of other ways, cancer and other health problems that are going to be the ultimate cause of our demise. But yoga seems to be influential in potentially improving one's health. So I think we're going to learn a lot more about that as all of the research that's still going on and has been going on now for the past number of years, funded through the NIH in Washington and now funded by just medical centers around the country who are interested in seeing what yoga can do. I think we're going to learn a lot more about how it's going to influence health in general and men's health in particular.
Yeah. Now you're bringing up one of the very concerning issues, which is heart conditions in men. But what are other health aspects a man can be helped, or a man's health can improve through yoga?
Well, I think there are other major health conditions that affect men to a large extent, such as diabetes. So not only heart disease, but diabetes, and all the precursors to heart disease like hypertension, high cholesterol levels, obesity, prostate health is another one that is of concern to many men. Interestingly, men, we tend to worry about prostate because we hear stories of maybe our fathers or older brothers or friends who've had a diagnosis of prostate cancer, have not died from it, but had to undergo treatment for it and came out the other side of treatment maybe less than they were before they went in, with difficulties with holding, having control over their bladder function, having difficulty with erections and sexual functioning. Yeah. So, the treatment sometimes might be worse than the disease. And so, if one has an alternative to that, that could be very powerful. Interestingly, Dean Ornish actually looked at prostate cancer after he looked at heart health, and he found that it didn't reverse prostate disease, but it stalled it out. In other words, the prostate tumor sizes didn't increase in the people that followed his four-pillar method that he had applied to heart disease. So here again, we've got yoga, we've got meditation, we've got breath work, we've got diet, we've got easy exercise, just walking 20 to 30 minutes a day. And dietary changes that are stalling out a cancer. So this is very encouraging. So I think there are a lot of conditions that men are faced with in which yoga could be potentially beneficial for them.
Now, you naturally are focusing on some of the health issues regarding the body. But the health of men can also be affected by other aspects that are not necessarily physical. Do you think that yoga can help also the mental health of a man, or do you?
I do. Knowing, as we both do, that yoga's roots were as a kind of psycho-spiritual practice, more than a physical healing practice, that any benefits came as more of a side effect of one's practices, that really yoga was designed to work with the stuff of the mind. I think that at least I have seen beneficial effects for things like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, all these things that are very prevalent and contemporary issues for men to consider as well, and which quite often men don't want to necessarily talk about and often are reluctant to seek help for. So, I think one thing that happens for many yoga practitioners, and I think for men as well as women, is that we start to get in tune with ourselves. We start to notice what's really going on. And when we can't just deny that these things are actually happening, then we start to look for some solutions. And I think the yoga is a good first step in making ourselves aware of what's going on, how dramatically it might be affecting our mental health, our physical health, our relationships, our work. And then there's an opportunity for change to take place for men.
Well, and you're bringing up something important, which is the practical aspect, because we men are somehow more practical.
We'd like to claim we're more practical.
We like to, correct. Yeah. Or we like to get things
practical.
done.
Yeah, we like to get things done.
Yes, and so it's definitely effective in terms of yoga, because if you practice, things get changed.
Yeah, they do, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that especially for men who might have grown up with some sort of a discipline, maybe they were a regular swimmer all through their high school and college years. Or they dedicated themselves to some triathlons for a while. That for some men, not all men, there is this ability to drop into a practice, a discipline, and realize that, hey, I can get something really beneficial out of this if I do it regularly. Yeah.
Now you're bringing, you brought up before erectile dysfunction as a result of prostate cancer. But let's face it, in our modern world, there are other reasons that are not just prostate
Absolutely.
cancer, and they might be just psychological reasons, or the very deep effects of stress can affect. Or so, can yoga help erectile dysfunction?
The studies are yet to be completed. And what little evidence folks who have written books on the health benefits of yoga have cited are a little sketchy from my perspective as someone who reads studies regularly and looks at the statistics. Would say kind of shaky. Not very many people in the study. Some conclusions that aren't really well founded. What I will say is that when you know about the physiology of something as simple as how an erection takes place, the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system are both involved. So initially you need to be relaxed mentally and physically in order to effectively have the changes to actually get a good erection. And then you have to have good sympathetic function to actually have a climax. So if you can actually improve the autonomic tone of someone, then conceivably it's going to have a beneficial effect on their sexual functioning. Right. And one thing we do know, we actually know that yoga has a beneficial effect on one's autonomic tone. We know through some pretty decent studies. So I'm extrapolating, I'm making an assumption, I'm proposing a theory that we still have to look at more specifically, but I suspect that this won't be a difficult study to design and actually get people to sign up for, because I think men would be interested in a non-pharmacologic way that's not going to put them at heart risk. The problem with a lot of these medications that help men maintain erections is they also put the heart at risk for heart disease. So if you have any risk factors for heart disease, you can't use those drugs, right? So there's a whole huge group of men out there that would love to have full capacity who are looking for other ways. And I think that if we can get somebody in the Bay Area to fund that, maybe UCSF will do that next, we could probably have a really good study going on here before too long. Yeah.
And that would be,
maybe we can collaborate.
Well, maybe. Let's see.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see. Now, do you think that women like men that practice yoga or not?
I have to tell you, I've been laughing the last week or so. There's a woman who's on the radio who says she's got this relationship site. So it's a matchmaking thing. And she goes, ladies, if you're looking, and she's talking to the women in this little ad that she does. And then she goes, right now, I've got a man who's in his early 50s who practices yoga. The first thing she says to describe this man is that he practices yoga. He's interested in international travel. He loves fine wines, and he wants to be in a deep and loving relationship. But the first thing that she mentions is that he does yoga. Yeah. I think there's something about that. I think that's telling that someone who's trying to sell a service is going to use yoga as an attractive quality for a man in a matchmaker. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that it is not going to hurt if a man's doing yoga as something that a woman's going to go, wow, that's interesting. This guy's exploring yoga. And I think the woman's interested in a man who's doing yoga not just for the physical benefits, but maybe is also reaping some of the other benefits of the practice, the mental, emotional benefits as well.
Yes. And would you say that it influences the ability to connect or to be in a relationship?
I think it can. I don't think it always does, but I think it can. I think that interpersonal communications could be improved by someone who studies yoga. It's interesting, I co-led a workshop in the in the winter in Mexico where we had 3 teachers and we each had our own special focus. So I offered a little therapeutics, one teacher offered a little Ayurvedic stuff, and the other teacher had been studying nonviolent communication. And so worked in that milieu. But we did it in the context of a yoga retreat. And it's always interesting because there's always a few men in those retreats who are resistant to usually that part that is a little bit more about communication. This also happened when I was in another retreat very recently where there was also a bit of group processing that went along with our yoga practices. And again, there was someone who was kind of like a manly man who was kind of scoffing at the idea initially, but by the end of several days together was actually expressing excitement about that group process. Yeah, so I think that it opens up the possibility of people connecting a little bit more on a heart level, on an emotional level.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps also connecting amongst men. which is, you know, I having grown up in another country, I found men in the United States not necessarily enjoying deeper connection, going out into the woods as we used to, you know, in ancient times. And so perhaps that's another aspect, which I think we enjoy at the men's kula many times.
Well, you know, one thing that we do at that kula is we take a moment at the very beginning of class and we go around and everyone just shares how they're doing right now. It's really
briefly,
an opportunity, very briefly. Yeah, but I mean, it's really quite, I don't want to say surprising, maybe just encouraging that the men actually share something about how they're feeling emotionally. That it's not just like, oh, I'm excited about my new job, or, you know, some positive aspect, but sometimes it's like I'm struggling with aspects of being a father with child rearing right now, or, you know, like some real sharing. And then the nice thing is we meet for a meal afterwards. And in those moments, you know, some of those threads get picked up again. Hey, what's going on with the kids? You mentioned something in the opening circle, and it's really a nice opportunity to connect on a deeper level. I know back when I was a practicing physician, you know, what do physicians do? They go play golf with other doctors. But I have to tell you, I was bored to tears when I would do that, because honestly, the men that I was with wouldn't actually share much about themselves. They talked superficially about a lot of things, but very rarely did we connect. Now, I did have other friends that were men, and we would connect on a very heart level, and it was really, those were my good close friendships. But they seemed few and far between. When I looked at the, you know, overall interactions I had with a lot of men in my field, and a lot of men are physicians, so there were many more physicians that were men in my community than there were women physicians. So those were my colleagues a lot of times. So you know, I think that that the field of medicine, which is still predominantly dominated by medicine, could also benefit from
by men, you mean? Medicine?
Dominated by male practitioners.
Yes.
Could benefit from this potential connecting on a deeper emotional level that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Now, do you find that there's the need for when you were saying earlier that some of your female students would bring in their man because you're a man, what do you think about women teaching yoga for men classes?
For men's classes?
Yeah.
I think it would be a great idea actually to have an all men's class led by a woman.
Why?
I think it would be interesting to see how the men in the group, if there was a willingness and an ability to turn that male power over to a woman, to be really led in a good way by a woman. I think it would just be an interesting paradigm shift, right?
A paradigm shift.
Yeah,
but what we're discussing is bringing men back to yoga.
Yeah.
And
well, in that sense, I don't know that that's the way to do it. Because that may be too distracting in a sense. We talked about distraction, of the fact that when there are women in class, that just that fact of, especially if it's a group of straight men, you know, that tendency to look at women as both, you know, potential partners for single men, and, you know, just the imagination. It's so interesting about imagination, you know, when we talk about yoga philosophy, because I'm always looking at my own imagination and going, wow, the mind is constantly creating scenarios. Yeah. Someone used to joke to me that, you know, you go on a silent Buddhist retreat for 10 days, you fall in love and break up 3 or 4 times during the retreat with different people in the retreat. So, you know, that potential of the mind to be distracted by, you know, sexuality, potentiality, and those sorts of issues that come up realistically for people, men and women, I think both. And I think when we're talking about the deeper aspects of yoga, about really the inward journey of the yogi, it's really the hero's journey, right, of finding self. Exactly. That you know, maybe would be better accomplished without that distraction. So maybe it would be beneficial to have classes that are just for men, and likewise classes that are just for women.
Yes.
And you know, for the last 20 years, I've been seeing a lot of retreats and classes for women only.
Yes.
And they do well because women actually go for that. But I actually had tried a couple times to have classes for men only, and I'd have 1 or 2 guys show up. So in terms of me as a teacher trying to make a living as a yoga teacher, it wasn't economically sustainable.
Yeah.
And I always find that the energy of teaching is enriched if we hit a threshold of 5, 6, 7 people.
Yes.
And then the energy of sharing just goes up from there in a really good way.
Correct.
So I haven't had a lot of success with that over the years, but I love what we're doing in Berkeley with the once a month men's yoga kula. Yeah. And I'm always surprised that men are willing to get up and come to class that starts at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. But it's beautiful. It's like, wow, this is great.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yes. Now, a lot of men also, even before they can be exposed to being intimidated or distracted or whatever, they just wouldn't even consider yoga because it's a girly thing.
Yeah.
What would you say to one of these men?
Well, the typical excuse that I get from men isn't that it's girly. They say, oh, but I'm too stiff to do yoga.
Okay.
And my response is, no, that's exactly why you need to do yoga. Yoga is for you. And I tell them that when I started doing yoga, and I try to do a standing forward bend with my knees straight, I could not get my hands far below my knees. Mm-hmm. That's how inflexible I was. So it definitely improved, at least on the physical level, my flexibility. I would suggest that it probably also improved my mental flexibility and my emotional flexibility as time went on as well. So I like to dispel those myths as soon as they come up. Or if they say, oh, I'm not really into stretching and chanting, and I go, well, just come take one of my classes. And you'll know immediately that it's not just about chanting and stretching. Mm-hmm. And they're confronted by the physicality, by the strength demands, by the focus, the mental focus that it requires. And I think just one class, I'd say just come take one class.
Yeah.
Now, it might be important that they take the right class, because there are gentle yoga classes that would not capture the man's imagination and desire the same way that another class would be.
Yeah.
But my brother's a perfect example. My brother, who I've been talking to yoga about for years, finally started taking a Bikram yoga class in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Now, you know what? That was perfect for him. He needed something that physical, that hot, that crazy to get him to go regularly, and he goes all the time. And now he's experimenting with other styles of yoga.
Yeah.
So what I like to say, and what my friend Mary Pafford says, anything that gets the man in the door is a good thing. From there, let's see what happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Baxter, for coming here
You're welcome.
Today, and thank you for being in that kula as well, because certainly when some of us men that enjoy yoga can be of incentive or
inspiration,
inspiration.
Yeah.
Inspiration is the right word. Thank you. To other men, that's our hope, that men return to yoga.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
My guest today was Baxter Bell. He has been actively deepening his understanding of yoga and relaxation since making the stress-reducing move from a career as a busy family doctor to that of a yoga teacher and medical acupuncturist. He is now involved in the integration of therapeutic applications of yoga with Western medicine, lecturing to healthcare professionals. He studied with Rodney Yee, Patricia Walden, and Eric Schiffman, and has been strongly influenced by the work of TKV, Jessica Char, and Donald Moyer. Baxter is also on faculty to several teacher training programs and teaches workshops and retreats in the country and internationally, including some specific Yoga for Men classes. I hope you like our show today. And if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time.